I am an African.
In the beginning, we have many different listeners from all over the world. Who is Dr. Nevis Mumba, and how did how was your journey? If you could just briefly describe it.
Well, my journey is basically an African journey, and for especially for those that grew up in Africa, rural Africa, they will identify more with me than those of you that grew up maybe in the cities of Africa. I grew up like 800 kilometers away from the capital of Zambia, here in Lusaka, and so I have a very humble beginning. I come from a family of 12. I'm the 11th born, like Joseph, and my father was a civil servant. Worked for government as a district administrator, and also as a teacher and inspector of schools. So he basically was a civil servant. My mother was a housewife. In order to bring up all the 12 of us, she concentrated on making sure that her priority was her children. And they brought us in a Christian home, in a place where values were extremely important. My father was a disciplinarian. He wanted to make sure that, being a headmaster himself, he brought that trade in the house. So he never left his little stick. Of course, these days, teachers are not allowed to spank their children, but during those days, it was almost unimaginable that somebody can teach without a stick in their hands, because it was part of the teaching schedule. So we grew up under very strict, disciplinary programs, and I don't regret. And so, yes, I come from the northern part of my country. And I went to secondary school in one of the premier schools here in Zambia called the Hillcrest Technical Secondary School in Livingstone. At that time, it was one of the two top schools in the country. By God's grace, they made a mistake and managed to push me there as well. So I went to school there and graduated. Then I went to a college to study instrumentation with the mining industry. And then after that, I received what we call a call from God to preach, and ended up in Dallas, Texas, at the Bible College there for a number of years. Came back to Zambia, organized a church ministry called Victory Ministries, and became a leader from 1980 of Victory Ministries, which grew into an international church organization with dozens of churches in Zambia and many others around the world. But besides that, really, I spent most of my time on national television as a national evangelist, and having crusades across my country until I joined the political process in which I am involved currently. But yeah, I come from a Christian background, and but very, very humble background. And I'm glad to see what God has done through these 63 years of my life.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, a funny fun fact. It's funny how life comes full circle. I think one of my family members actually attended some of the crusades that you had, and actually used to tell me about how the crusades were and how big they were at that
I think they're very
particular time.
popular. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's it's quite amazing. But you mentioned, of course, how you were led to become a pastor and were at the pulpit. And so, how do you move from the pulpit to becoming Zambia's um vice president? I ask this question because now a lot of things are happening in terms of, a lot of people are calling for a separation between the church and the state, or are trying, like, the lines are very blurred, especially when you see politicians that claim to be to follow the I can say Christianity, or the values of Christianity, but then on the other side are not doing those sort of things. So how did that journey
Mm.
happen, and how do you bring the two together?
Yeah, I think you have asked two fundamental questions, and let me try to separate them. First of all, you asked me how did I move from the pulpit into the politics? And then indirectly, you've also asked or raised an issue that how do you reconcile situations where somebody claims to follow the values of Christianity, but in real life they do not, demonstrate that in their daily lives. So, look, personally, my call into church work is what we call evangelism. I'm an evangelist by calling. To those that are not familiar with Christian lingo, that basically means, one of the fivefold ministries that the Bible talks about. There's an evangelist, there's a teacher, there's a prophet, there's an apostle, and all those are different offices within church work. My office is that of an evangelist. And really what it means is that I'll go into a very dark area where Christianity is not exercised or even known. And I will probably be one of the first people to take the light of the gospel to a darkened place. So my calling is that of going to a place where traditionally Christianity may not have been popular, and then introduce the message of Christ and what God can do in people's lives. And people respond to become Christians, a lot of them for the first time in their lives. And so that is what an evangelist does. A teacher stays at home and teaches Christians on how to live by Christian values and how to overcome daily problems. A pastor continues to look after the Christians week after week to make sure that their needs are met, their spiritual and physical needs are mitigated through teaching and preaching. So for me, my job is to take light where there is darkness. That's a very basic, dumbest way to explain it. Really, that, an evangelist takes light where there's darkness. And so how did I end up in politics? By the same calling. I became a political leader because I looked around for the darkest area of our society. And it was clear to me that one of the darkest areas of our society and our time, it's politics. Politics, it's called a dirty game, one of the darkest areas where truth is not premium, where honesty is not an issue that people aspire for. It's a place where human crookedness is demonstrated at its highest levels. So for me, it was the natural place to take the values of God and the values of Christianity to that area that lacks those values. So going into politics to me was not as complicated as certain people consider it to be. It was a natural drawing for me to go there because that's exactly what God called me to do. To take light where it is dark. And I came to discover that the political world is where people lie, cheat, steal, and, just take advantage of others. And if we don't take the light there, we don't take morality and integrity there, then the people will continue to suffer. So basically, that's how I ended up in the political process. It's a long story. It's a story on its own that needs its own hour. But I think that explanation just shows you where my motivation came from. Now, you've raised another issue, which is extremely important, that, people claim to be Christians, but their output does not demonstrate that. First of all, you must understand that God, the Bible says, it takes the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. God chooses to use an ordinary human being to be his vessel and his servant to proclaim his message, but that does not make that vessel perfect. That vessel has shortcomings, that vessel has difficulties and battles that he's fighting, along the way, but he is called by God and separated to be God's instrument. And there's absolutely no preacher of the gospel who is 100% perfect. Not even the Pope is perfect. If somebody casts a light on the Pope's life, every detail, people stop going to their masses, because every human being has got challenges that he works through, and God works with us in order to release his message to the generation that we are responsible for. So yes, we are not perfect. No one is perfect, but God uses imperfect vessels in order to release his perfect word to an imperfect world.
I am an African.